English Campfire.
So picture this. You're standing in the pitch black of a dense forest.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and there is just a torrential downpour soaking right through your so-called waterproof jacket.
Which never actually stay waterproof, by the way.
Exactly. And you have no tent. Just this sagging, sad piece of plastic tied unevenly between two trees.
Sounds miserable.
Oh, it gets worse. Your campfire, which you desperately tried to start using your last remaining potato chips as kindling.
Oh, man. Not the snacks.
Yeah, the snacks are gone, and the fire has been completely dead for hours. And right now, just a few feet away in the dark, you hear a wild animal casually eating the rest of your food supply.
Okay, yeah.
Sounds like an absolute nightmare.
Honestly, it sounds like a situation where someone actively tried to stack the deck against their own survival. Like they planned it to be terrible.
It really does. But welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a highly entertaining, totally catastrophic, yet somehow ultimately rewarding true story.
Yeah, of 5 friends on a camping trip in Washington State's Pacific Northwest.
Right. And we are going to look at this massive, compounding cascade of failures to answer a lingering question. Why do we willingly subject ourselves to this kind of misery?
And why do these specific disastrous trips often become our most treasured memories?
Because the setup for this trip, it started out so optimistic, they planned it months in advance.
Right, this wasn't just a spontaneous thing.
Not at all. They
What?
booked campsite 14 near the North Trailhead for 2 whole nights. They packed the stove, the sleeping bags, the food.
So from a logistical standpoint, they were prepared.
Right. Except for one crucial detail. The forecast predicted a 60% chance of rain.
Oh, wow. Which literally means a 60 in 100 probability of getting rained on.
Exactly. And they looked at that and decided to just
Completely ignore.
ignore it and go anyway. So I have to ask you, the listener, right now, have you ever confidently ignored a weather warning, only to have nature instantly prove you wrong?
I mean, we've all done it, right? It's a classic demonstration of optimism bias.
Optimism bias.
Yeah, when humans invest significant time, money, and emotional anticipation into an event, our brains actually struggle to process inconvenient statistical realities.
So we just block out the bad news.
Pretty much. The cognitive dissonance is too high. Acknowledging the 60% chance of rain would mean abandoning the sunk cost of all their planning.
Right.
So the dopamine of anticipation essentially overrides the brain's risk assessment center.
You convince yourself you're going to thread the needle somehow. And honestly, when they first arrive at the campground around noon, nature actually plays along with that delusion.
Oh, does it?
Yeah. The sky is totally overcast, just a solid gray sheet. To most people, that looks gloomy.
But not in the Pacific Northwest.
No.
No, overcast but dry is actually considered the optimal condition for hiking there.
Wait, really? Why is that?
Well, the cloud cover acts as a massive solar shield. You aren't taking direct UV radiation, so your core body temperature stays regulated.
Oh, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. And your sweat evaporation rate is much more efficient. So standing under those gray clouds, they were probably feeling completely vindicated.
Oh, they definitely thought they beat the system. Vindicated right up until they popped the trunk to set up camp.
Uh-oh. The first domino falls.
Yeah. They pull out the tent fabric, lay it flat on the ground, and realize they have completely forgotten the tent poles.
Oh, no. You're cute.
Nope. They brought the nylon shell, the rainfly, the stakes, but the poles were left sitting in a garage miles away.
That is an engineering disaster.
Okay, let's unpack this, because how bad is it really? I mean, I compare it to buying a house, but the builder forgets to install the walls.
Yeah.
You're just left with the roof lying flat on the floor.
That structural analogy hits the nail on the head. A modern tent relies entirely on tensile strength and compression.
So the fabric does nothing on its own.
Exactly. The synthetic fabric, like the nylon, has absolutely zero structural integrity. It is completely dependent on the flexible skeleton of the poles.
Right, because you bend them into shape.
Yes, and they want to snap back into a straight line. That outward pressure stretches the fabric tight, and it's that tension that allows the material to shed wind and water.
So without the poles...
Without the poles, a tent isn't a shelter. It's basically just a useless pile of nylon, a non-porous blanket.
So panic sets in. But they improvise. They go to a neighboring campsite and manage to borrow a tarp.
Okay, one of those large, crinkly sheets of waterproof plastic.
Exactly. And some rope. They spend the afternoon trying to string this makeshift shelter up between 2 trees.
See, rigging a tarp shelter is actually a fundamental wilderness survival skill. but it requires a solid understanding of fluid dynamics and geometry.
Which I'm guessing 5 panicked friends did not have.
Probably not. You have to create a ridge line with sufficient tension and then angle the sides steeply enough so water runs off immediately.
And if you don't?
If it's hastily rigged, it lacks tension. Even a small depression in the fabric will catch a few ounces of rainwater.
Oh, and then the weight pulls it down further.
Exactly. Creating a larger depression, catching more water, until the whole structure sags and just
Ye-
collapses under the weight.
Well, the weight of that water arrives right on schedule at 4 p.m.
Ah, there's the 60% probability.
Yep. The overcast sky turns into a steady, heavy downpour. And now their compromised structure becomes a serious liability. They are getting cold fast.
And that's dangerous. Being exposed to a steady downpour in 50-degree weather is actually far more dangerous for hypothermia than being out in 20-degree snow.
Really? More dangerous than snow.
Yeah, because water conducts heat away from the human body roughly 25 times faster than air.
Wow.
So sitting under a wobbly tarp, you don't have the microclimate that a sealed tent provides. Your body heat is just being instantly stripped away.
Which drives them to catastrophe number 2, the desperate struggle for warmth.
Naturally.
They're shivering, their clothes are damp, and they gather around the designated fire ring to try and build a fire.
And those fire rings are mandatory in national parks for a reason.
Right, they're those heavy metal or stone circles.
Yeah, and building an unauthorized fire outside of them can result in hefty fines.
Why are the rules so strict about that?
They're designed to prevent root fires. A lot of campers don't realize that a fire built directly on the forest floor can actually smolder downwards.
Wait, really? Underground?
Yes, the heat can ignite underground root systems, and the fire can travel subsurface for days before popping up elsewhere as a massive wildfire.
That is terrifying.
Plus, the rings prevent sterilizing the topsoil, which protects the microscopic mycelium networks the trees rely on.
Well, starting a wildfire was definitely not going to happen here because they couldn't get a spark to catch to save their lives.
Wet wood, I assume.
Completely soaked from the rain.
Yeah.
And they had no fire starter, no dry paper, nothing.
This is a harsh lesson in thermodynamics.
How so?
Well, fire requires 3 elements, right? Oxygen, fuel, and heat.
Sure.
When wood is wet, the heat energy is entirely hijacked.
Mm.
Instead of heating the wood, the energy goes into the latent heat of vaporization.
Meaning it's just boiling the water?
Exactly. It forces the water inside the wood to turn into steam. Until every drop of water in that localized spot is boiled off, the temperature of the wood itself cannot rise to its ignition point.
So without kindling?
Without small, dry pieces of wood to sustain a flame long enough to boil away that moisture, lighting wet logs is physically impossible.
Okay, well, knowing they need kindling, they resort to absolute desperate improvisation.
Oh no, what do they do?
They grab a paper shopping bag and the remaining supply of potato chips.
They use potato chips as kindling.
Yes, they literally pile up their snacks and use a lighter to set the chips on fire under the wet wood.
That's surprisingly ingenious.
But I have to push back on the logic here. Is it really worth sacrificing your snack supply to fight nature in the pouring rain? I mean, wouldn't eating the chips and letting your body metabolize that fat to stay warm be a better idea?
That is a phenomenal question. And you're entirely correct that digesting fat yields ATP, which generates metabolic heat.
Right, so eat the chips.
However, there's a tipping point. When you are sitting still in cold rain, the rate of convective heat loss outpaces your body's ability to generate heat internally.
Oh, no matter how many calories you eat.
Exactly. At that stage, you urgently need an external heat source to dry your clothes. If your clothes stay wet, you will go hypothermic. So sacrificing the chips was actually the correct survival calculation.
Wow, okay. And honestly, the chips performed pretty well.
I'm not surprised. A potato chip is essentially a thin matrix of dehydrated starch deeply saturated with oil and fat.
And fat burns.
Very well. Fats are energy-dense hydrocarbons. Because the chip is so thin, it has a massive surface area to volume ratio. When you introduce a flame, the oil catches fire almost immediately.
A grease fire in the middle of the woods.
Right.
But here's the inevitable defeat. The rain was just too heavy. After 20 minutes, it puts the small fire completely out.
Ah, yeah. The ambient moisture overpowered the heat of the chips.
The wet wood never caught, and they were left shivering in the dark.
What's fascinating here is how quickly modern conveniences vanish when you're exposed to the elements. You go from a planned vacation to a literal survival scenario in a matter of hours.
And with the fire dead, they retreat under their wobbly tarp. But as we know, the real danger of the wilderness isn't the weather.
No, it's what the weather masks in the dark.
Right. It's late at night, surrounded by the silence of the forest, and then they hear rustling.
Oh, that soft, continuous sound of movement in the vegetation.
Yep. Something is moving around their campsite. And this brings us to the third catastrophe.
Let me guess. Food storage.
A critical error. The group failed to use the bear box.
Oh no, you cannot make that mistake.
They left a bag of snacks right in their improvised tarp shelter.
So for anyone who doesn't know, a bear box is a bolted metal container at campsites, specifically designed because bears lack opposable thumbs. It is mandatory.
But I always wonder, how does a bear even know a sealed bag of food is there? To us, it doesn't smell like anything until you open it.
It's hard for us to comprehend because we are a visually dominant species. But bears map the world through scent.
So they have a really good nose.
That's an understatement.
Hmm.
The olfactory bulb in a black bear's brain is massive, at least 5 times larger than humans. Plus, they possess a Jacobson's organ in the roof of their mouth that enhances scent detection.
So a plastic bag doesn't stop that.
To a bear, a sealed plastic bag is a complete illusion. Plastic is porous at a microscopic level. A bear can pick up the scent of those calories from miles away through dense forest in the pouring rain.
So the bear follows the scent highway straight into their camp. The campers are terrified.
I bet.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The bear isn't a movie monster.
Right. Black bears are the most common in North America.
Yeah.
And they aren't naturally aggressive unless threatened.
Exactly. It just ambles in, rips open the grocery bag, eats the remaining chips, completely ignores the terrified campers, and just wanders off.
Wow. They got very lucky.
No one is hurt, but they are officially snackless.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, though, that encounter is actually terrible.
Because of the campground rule.
Yes. A fed bear is a dangerous bear. Not using the bear box can lead to huge fines because feeding wildlife, even accidentally, is incredibly harmful. It teaches the bear to associate humans with food.
Which eventually leads to the bear having to be euthanized by rangers.
Exactly.
It casts a dark shadow over it, for sure. But moving to the morning, after a sleepless, freezing night where a wild animal stole their food, logic dictates they should pack up and flee.
Any rational risk-benefit analysis would tell you the trip is over.
But they don't. They decide to hike anyway,
Oh, wow.
pushing through muddy trails, completely exhausted, for 3 miles.
And why do that? Why push forward when you are already miserable?
Because of the reward. At the end of those 3 miles, the clouds finally break, and it reveals exactly why people endure the Pacific Northwest wilderness.
The old-growth forest.
Yes, spectacular mountains and total silence.
Stepping into an old-growth forest is like biological time travel. These are ancient forests undisturbed by humans for centuries.
The massive trees, right?
Massive. You're looking at Douglas firs that are over 500 years old. These living organisms were putting down roots before the printing press was invented.
Yeah.
It creates a unique ecosystem that feels like a natural cathedral. The canopy is so thick, the sheer vertical scale, it physically forces a sense of awe.
Well, they reach the summit, the absolute highest point of the mountain, and sign the trail register. And the narrator notes they felt more alive than in months, despite the misery.
I completely believe that.
So what does this all mean? Why do we romanticize the suffering?
It's the psychology of the wilderness reward. The sheer contrast between the disastrous night and the ancient beauty of the summit makes the destination feel profoundly earned.
It's all about the contrast.
Right? If things had gone perfectly, it would just be a nice view. But because they suffered, their brains flood with dopamine and endorphins when the stress is finally removed. It's often called type 2 fun, visible in the moment, incredibly rewarding in retrospect.
That makes so much sense. So to briefly recap this spectacular cascade of failures,
Yeah, let's review the damage.
missing structural poles, a 20-minute potato chip fire, and a midnight chip-stealing bear, all culminating in a breathtaking 500-year-old forest summit.
And while they did wisely drive home a day early, they gained the memory of a lifetime.
Because the things that go wrong on a trip are almost always the things you remember best.
Right, you laugh about them the loudest later.
Exactly. Which leaves you with a rather provocative thought to mull over. If perfectly executed, flawlessly planned trips tend to fade from our memories, but our chaotic disasters stay with us forever, should we secretly be hoping for things to go just a little bit sideways on our next adventure? Maybe just enough to give the story some teeth. Keep that in mind the next time you're packing your gear. Until next time.